Prior to the start of this past NHL season, it was hardly a stretch to say that the Washington Capitals would be bad this year. They had holes all over their lineup and one of the lowest projected win totals in the league. And looking at this team following the conclusion of the regular season, you could actually argue that those preseason expectations were pretty close to being accurate. They finished 27th in goal differential with a staggering -37, 28th in goals for, and had the second most losses by 4 or more goals in the league. Yet somehow, someway, they made the playoffs. Now obviously the Caps' style of play didn't translate well, getting obliterated by the Rangers in a 4-game sweep. But Washington gave us yet another example of the fact that thanks to the parity of the NHL and some crazy playoff formatting back in the day, you can be that bad and still find a way into the postseason. So without further ado, these are the top 5 worst NHL teams to ever make the playoffs.
Play clock at 5. Score 4 goals. 3. A 2-home run and 1.
Kicking things off at number 5, we have the only team on this list from the salary cap era, the 2011-2012 Florida Panthers. Now at first glance, you might be thinking this team had 94 points. How could they be that bad? Well, I'm glad you asked, because while this Panthers team did have 38 wins, they had 44 losses, with 18 of them coming in overtime or shootouts, the most ever in the history of the NHL. With just 3 guys on the team scoring 20 goals and only 4 tallying more than 35 points, the 11-12 Panthers entered the postseason with a brutal -24 goal differential. Now, giving credit where credit's due, the Cats didn't go down without a fight, and even had a 3-2 lead in their first round matchup with the Devils. But it was only a matter of time until they would exercise their overtime demons once again, as the Panthers lost both games 6 and 7 in overtime, capping off one of the more interesting seasons we've ever seen. 4th place here goes to the Hartford Whalers from the 1991-1992 season, which in fact was the last time the Whalers ever made the playoffs before their relocation to Carolina, and it wasn't pretty. Playing in the 6-team Adams division, as long as Hartford didn't finish last, they'd make the postseason, and they did just that. But it was far less because the Whalers were actually good, and far more due to the fact that the Quebec Nordiques absolutely stunk this year. Hartford posted just 26 wins along with 41 losses and 13 ties, and still finished 13 points up on Quebec for the final spot in the division, despite having a goal differential of -38 this year. After trading Ron Francis the season prior, Hartford ended the 91-92 regular season 3rd worst in the league in goals for, and had just 1 player post more than 60 points, which caused for a nightmare first round matchup against the Montreal Canadiens and their league-leading 2.5 goals allowed per game. The Whalers did actually take the Habs to 7 games, but averaged just 2 goals per game that series, ultimately getting booted in the first round in Hartford's final playoff appearance. Coming in at 3rd place on the list is the 1985-1986 Vancouver Canucks, who somehow, someway made the Stanley Cup playoffs with a 23-44-13 record. Yes, you heard that right. Simply put, the NHL playoff structure was an absolute disaster in the 80s. Following the WHA merger in 1979, the NHL decided it was time to implement a 16-team postseason format, the same one used today with the 32-team league. The only problem? At the time, the league was comprised of just 21 teams. So with just 5 teams not making the playoffs, it allowed for some awful teams to get in. So much so that the 85-86 Canucks won't even be the last team you'll see on this list from that specific season. Despite recording 59 points on the year and owning a -51 goal differential, Vancouver managed to finish ahead of the division's last place LA Kings and drew themselves a first round matchup with the Edmonton Oilers, who had twice as many points as the Canucks in what was, by the way, the same year Wayne Gretzky happened to set the record for the most points ever in a single season. As I'm sure you can imagine, it did not go so well for Vancouver. In the best of 5 series, Edmonton outscored them 17-5 in what is still to this day the worst margin of defeat in a 3-game series in NHL history. As I said before, the 1985-86 season was especially egregious and will be sticking around with it for the 2nd worst team on this list, the 85-86 Winnipeg Jets. The fact that this season produced 2 teams on this list is nuts. But what's even crazier is that both the Jets and Canucks were also in the same division this year. No wonder Gretzky had 215 points. Not to be outdone, the Jets matched the Canucks point total this year with 59. And they actually mustered up 3 more wins than Vancouver on the year, going 26, 47, and 7. But what separates the two is the goal differential. Because if you thought -51 was bad, boy do I ever have a number for you. As the 85-86 Jets finished the regular season with a -77 goal differential, scoring 295 goals while allowing 372, Winnipeg finished 17th out of 21 teams in both categories, which, like we discussed, still somehow gave them a fighting chance to get into the postseason. The Jets edged out LA down the stretch of the regular season, taking them down in 2 of their last 3 games, and clinched a meeting with Calgary in round 1, who they had lost to 6 times already that year. Unsurprisingly, the Flames swept the Jets 3-0, putting the duo of awful playoff teams from the 85-86 season to rest for good. Finally, at the number 1 spot, it would really only be fitting that the team with the longest Stanley Cup drought and one of the worst postseason curses in all of sports also claims possession of the single worst team to ever make the playoffs, the 1987-1988 Toronto Maple Leafs. It's impossible to fathom that a team could be 1 point away from claiming the worst record in the league and still make the playoffs, but that's exactly what the Leafs did. Ending the season on a 2-14 slide, the Leafs were far and away the second worst team in the league this year. They went 21-49-10 on the year, managing to accumulate just 52 points in an 80-game season. They were 4th worst in goals for and 3rd worst in goals against, and posted an abysmal -72 goal differential. Led by Eddie Olczyk, the Leafs actually sat comfortably out of the playoffs with 25 games left in the regular season, but as we've learned time and time again from the league's broken playoff structure, it wasn't a matter of how good the Leafs were. It was just a matter of not being the worst. So when the Minnesota North Stars won just 3 of their remaining 25 games that year, they plummeted to last place in the division, granting the 52-point Leafs a playoff berth. It's the lowest point total ever by a playoff team and proves to be even more of an abnormality considering an 82-point Rangers team missed out on the postseason that same year. And as things usually go in Leafland come playoff time, they were bounced 4-2 in the first round by the Detroit Red Wings, allowing at least 5 goals in 5 of the 6 games that series, putting a fitting end to the worst playoff season of all time. As it served as a common theme throughout this video, we will never know why the NHL thought it'd be a good idea to roll out a 16-team postseason format with 22 or less teams. But it's certainly safe to say that we will never see teams this bad in the playoffs ever again. My name's Levi Smith, and that's my top 5.